call their bluff and communicate directly to the Kremlin and say, look, this is a humanitarian mission. We're going to escort all these ships that are loaded with grain and any others that come from Odessa directly out through the straits to wherever the ports are, wherever they're supposed to deliver this grain. And we're going to open this up and we're going to protect it. And we're going to have world's greatest air force overhead in international airspace. And if anybody messes with any of our Turkish or Romanian or Bulgarian ships or whoever's escorting, then that ship is going to be destroyed immediately.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Backstory. I'm Dana Lewis. Before the Russian land invasion of Ukraine, February the 24th, the Russian Navy stole the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea coast from Ukraine under the auspices of conducting a military exercise. Some exercise. 24 Russian warships moved into the area, blocking Ukrainian ports and launching missiles into Ukrainian cities. And as this war has dragged on, the Navy has kept its stranglehold on Ukraine's southern coast, denying merchant vessels access to Ukrainian grain. The UN has warned of a hurricane of hunger. This is the breadbasket of the world, Ukraine and Russia supplying some 40% of grain to the world. Russian leader Putin has used food to hold the world hostage, say critics. And food prices have jumped in Africa and Asia. Stored grain in Ukraine is rotting in ports. New harvests, soon ready for export, can't make it past Russian warships either. Putin now says he will let the food be exported if Western sanctions on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine are lifted. Dream on. What's the world to do? Well, as you're about to hear, there is a growing movement to break the Black Sea blockade, and soon. All right, Sir Lawrence David Freedman is a professor of war studies at King's College in London, and he has been described as the Dean of British Strategic Studies. Hi, Professor.
Hi.
It's very kind of you to talk to us. You are in Davos for the Economic Forum, but this is where billionaire financier George Soros yesterday talked about the invasion of Ukraine as the beginning of World War III, and the best way to preserve free civilization was for the West to defeat President Putin. I mean, you couldn't make this any more dramatic and put more on the table in terms of the risks to civilization right now than that statement. Do you agree?
I think we have to be careful how we frame it. I think the starting point, first, it is striking that this is sort of, as people have been saying, a Ukrainian Davos. I mean, it's dominating all discussion. Secondly, the basic objective of the Ukrainians is to recover all of Ukraine. It's not to overthrow Putin. There's no attempt to threaten Russian territory itself. Their objective is to get their country back, and then to get on with the enormous task of reconstruction. And I think that is how it's best framed. If we start putting it in terms of defeating Putin, in one sense, yes, it's important because whatever he thought he was going to be able to achieve in Ukraine, it's important that he doesn't achieve it. But that doesn't mean to say that we can set on a campaign for sense regime change in Moscow. That'll happen by Russian means, by Russian people, if it happens at all. And what we mustn't do is set ourselves objectives by which, if we actually do see Ukraine recover its territory, in some sense that will be seen to have been a failure of some sort. It'll be an amazing achievement. So I think I would focus the objectives on a more limited sense, but still very demanding, rather than the question of what happens to Putin. There is an issue which will affect questions of sanctions, of what do you do if Ukraine has returned, got its territory back, and Putin is still in power. Do you keep sanctions going like we kept sanctions going while Saddam Hussein was still in power and so on? I think that's going to be an issue. How do you deal with a man who has acted in the way Putin has acted? That's going to be an issue. But I think we need to keep the territorial integrity of Ukraine to the fore.
Certainly, at the very, very minimum, I think the conversation is going to evolve into containment of Putin's Russia, not necessarily long-term Russia. But look, let me ask you about not so much the ground war right now, but the increasing talk about the war at sea, potentially, and this stranglehold that Russia has on the Black Sea coast of Ukraine, blocking grain shipments out of Odessa. It is becoming increasingly paramount, with grain rotting in silos and then grain that is being harvested now. And you're a proponent of breaking the blockade, if I can speak for you.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a piece with that as the headline, so I can't escape the logic. I think actually, since then, the conversation's moved on. Because it is such an urgent international question. I think lots of people, I think, were coming to the same conclusion very quickly, that the greatest international repercussions of this war will be if this huge amount of Ukrainian agricultural produce, it's not just grain, can't get out. I mean, some of it can get out, but probably only 15% of what needs to get out, but by rail and road and so on. It has to go by sea. I think the conversation's moved on, and we're now talking about more of an international effort, humanitarian effort, with the UN taking a lead. And that's partly because I think it's hard to do this in the short term without some sort of Russian cooperation, frankly. I mean, Russia has its own interests in this. I don't think it helps Russia if it's seen to be the country that forces large numbers of other countries into starvation. So I think the talk at the moment is of a humanitarian corridor in which shipping companies will just simply have to have confidence, because otherwise the insurance premiums will be through the roof. So it's a very delicate act. As I understand it, there's less concern on the military side with demining, because it's actually not that hard to find the mines. Basically, so long as Russian ships could take shots at accompanying warships or the container ships, then it just won't happen because of the it just becomes prohibitive for the companies. So I think there's quite a lot of movement now on this issue. Russia's allowed ships to leave Mariupol, where a number of them were stuck. I don't think it. The only optimism I have on this issue at the moment is it serves no interest of Russia to be seen to be forcing countries into not rocketing inflation and even famine, except for the fact that it will help the Ukrainian economy as well.
Okay, you're not a fan of NATO opening up a corridor because the risks for confrontation are too high?
I'm just not sure you'd get the shipping companies to work with that. NATO ships are going to have to be involved. I mean, in the sense, US Royal Navy or whatever you're going to have some ships involved in case the message hasn't gone through, or as the Russia has done with other humanitarian operations in this war, it agrees to it and then takes and then starts shelling. So I that's why it's a delicate thing, because nobody really trusts Russia to keep its word, and it would blame the Ukrainians or whatever for doing this if it happened. So that's why I think I would always be wary of NATO branding. I think you can have an ad hoc coalition. You've got to have Turkey on board, which is a member of NATO, but as we know, goes its own way because Turkey, controls the entrance to the Black Sea. So I think in that sense, if it can be done through the UN, who were the ones who were involved in the discussion of evacuations in Mariupol and so on. If you can do that, then that's best. But I think this is an issue that's going to be resolved in the next, one way or the other, in the next few weeks. Because if you wait until the new harvest is in, it's too late.
What if Russia says no, they're not interested, and they try to keep their foot on the neck of those ports? I mean,
then it's a national catastrophe. I mean, sometimes there are problems for which there aren't good solutions, and lots of efforts are being put into finding other routes out of Ukraine, and they will make some progress, but they're just not enough compared with the scale of the problem. So we have to have our eyes wide open on this, and the thing is, NATO no doubt could sink the Black Sea Fleet with all the risks that would entail, but what it wouldn't be able to do is to persuade ship owners who are facing large insurance premiums to go and collect the grain. That's the basic problem, and that's why I think at the moment the view is that this has to be handled through the UN.
How do you handle it through the UN very quickly if Russia has a veto on the Security Council?
The fact is, if Russia wants to stop this happening, Russia can stop it happening. I mean, Russia has its own interests, not just in sort of PR terms, which doesn't always seem to bother it that much, but in getting it out its own fertilizers and exports and so on. I mean, there'll be quid pro quos in this. Again, I think we have to have our eyes open about what this will involve. I think this has to be in some ways separated from the war itself. And it's an area where some concessions may have to be made in this very specific area of agricultural export to make it happen. But the tragedy that could follow after a period, droughts and so on, where so it wasn't as if the food supply situation was great already; it was already very tight. The tragedies that could follow are enormous, and would hit every country in the world. So, Russia and Ukraine between them, 40% or something of export? I mean, this is serious stuff.
Is this a coalition of the willing that was proposed by Lithuania, and then the UK said at first they wouldn't contribute warships to the effort, or do you feel we've moved on since then, and that the UK?
I think discussions are moving very fast at the moment. I mean, partly because it's an urgent question, an awful lot of policy making attention certainly in the Ukrainian government, in Western governments, in the international agencies, is all going into this, because it's one of those problems that not hard to work out cause and effect. So often these very complicated problems, and this is quite straightforward. You've got to get that grain out and to the places where it's needed, and then you can fill up the silos again and go to some sort of back and let the agricultural cycle work itself through. There are other problems with Ukrainian agriculture because the Russians have been targeting that as well. So the problem isn't over then, but the immediate problem is over.
So you don't talk about breaking the blockade. You talk about a negotiated passage with Russia.
I talked about breaking the blockade. I'm now pretty convinced. Look, in fact, you have to break it. You have to stop it. But it's not going to be so easy by forcing your way through all guns blazing.
All right. Professor, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate talking to you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir. All right, General Ben Hodges retired, is a former commander of U.S. Army Europe. He is currently the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies, the Center for European Policy Analysis. Hi, General.
Dana, good afternoon.
Ben, if you can guide me through what's happening in the Black Sea, because a lot of people say that we're hearing a lot about the ground war, but in fact, there is a real struggle in the Black Sea to stop Russia from permanently shutting down Ukraine's access to those waters. And there's a lot at stake for the world right now.
Yeah, there is a lot of illegal activity underway by the Russian Federation, including their Navy. They've been doing this for years, and they just never have really been challenged adequately for what they're doing. And certainly their operations are intended now to isolate Ukraine away from the Black Sea for the purpose of wrecking their economy and as a stage in eliminating Ukraine as a state. So that's what this is about. And by blocking their ports or occupying their ports, of course, Ukraine is unable to export its grain, which millions of people depend on around the world. And of course, Ukraine's economy depends on that a lot. So this is part of what's going on. The ability of Russia to launch missiles into apartment buildings from their Black Sea fleet is also a component of what's going on here. But look, this is also about freedom of navigation on international water. Turkey should be playing a critical role here. Turkey has, in fact, stopped Russian ships from entering the Black Sea through the Bosphorus, through the so-called Turkish Straits, which is a good thing, although, frankly, I think it was a few weeks too late. Turkey talks about regional ownership. And I think right now is a great opportunity for them to demonstrate regional ownership by pressing Russia to allow grain export, for example, from Ukraine.
Do you think that this blockade, which was never announced as a blockade, it was supposed to be a naval exercise, is that an illegal blockade?
Well, a blockade is an act of war in legal terms. So if they don't declare it, I think this is Russia continuing to skirt around the edges of legality. But it was important that Turkey said that what's happening in Ukraine is a war. And so under Montreux Convention, that's the description or the definition that they used in order to be able to restrict Russian warships from coming up through the straits. The fact is Russia blocks grain shipments and other shipments through the port of Odessa, as well as other Ukrainian ports.
There are nearly 25 million tons of Ukrainian wheat stuck in Odessa. There are commercial shipping vessels, not all of them Ukrainian. There are commercial shipping vessels that are stuck there right now. There will be a harvest in Ukraine, which is the breadbasket, as you have already referred to, the tremendous amount of grain that the world needs to feed hungry people. It is the breadbasket of the world to some degree, and so is Russia. Is it time to launch an operation if Russia will not relent and allow those ports to operate? Who could launch an operation to open up that seaway, if you will, to merchant vessels so that food can move around the world?
So you raise an important point. There are millions of tons of grain already harvested that are waiting to be delivered. And I spoke recently with a gentleman who runs one of Ukraine's ports, or has in the past. And he said that the type of grain that we're talking about does not store well. So it's at risk of going bad here in the next few months if it doesn't get delivered in time. And then there is another crop that's coming in. So we are at a situation where not only are people depending on this food, millions of people, particularly in Africa and the Middle East and somewhat in Asia, but it's going to get worse if this doesn't get fixed. Now, clearly, the United Nations has a role to play here. Russia, obviously, as a permanent member of the Security Council, will block or veto actions by the United Nations that would force them to allow shipments to happen, which I think is on a related theme that we can discuss one day. Does Russia deserve to have a seat on the UN Security Council with voting and veto rights? Maybe it's time for the Security Council to be revamped. Nonetheless, I think we are getting close to the time where if the United Nations or the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, can't cause something to happen, then I think the United States or the Alliance or Turkey or somebody is going to have to take decisive action to open this up. The Russian Navy is zero threat to any serious NATO force. They are not that good. That's been on display now for the past several months. They are not that good. So if it came down to it, the Russian Navy would be swept from the sea. The problem is we continue to deter ourselves and worry about provocation when, in fact, every time we've finally stepped over a threshold that we were scared of before, nothing's happened. And so I think it's time that we consider working with our Turkish ally, supporting them, enabling them to open up, to escort grain convoys and other merchant vessels to let them get out of Odessa and out of the Black Sea.
So you're talking about a potential confrontation between NATO ships and Russian ships. Do you think that there is a way of tying a bow on this where Russia is told NATO forces that are moving in that area, which is international waters, are not going to confront or attack Russian ships, but they are very serious about opening up world food shipments?
Yeah, look, we have allowed the Russians to deter us, or we've deterred ourselves because we're so concerned about something seen as provocation. Yeah, I mean, you remember it wasn't that long ago we were seriously arguing about whether or not to give Stinger to the Russians. And now here we are, we're providing artillery and rocket launch, all sorts of real capability. And I believe that this, it would be another example of call their bluff and communicate directly to the Kremlin and say, look, this is a humanitarian mission. We're going to escort all these ships that are loaded with grain and any others that come from Odessa directly out through the straits to wherever the ports are, wherever they're supposed to deliver this grain. And we're going to open this up and we're going to protect it. And we're going to have world's greatest air force overhead in international airspace. And if anybody messes with any of our Turkish or Romanian or Bulgarian ships or whoever's escorting, then that ship is going to be destroyed immediately. So this is a humanitarian mission. Now, I'm not naive. There are people that will faint at even the idea of doing this. And I was unsuccessful in an effort with others to ask for a humanitarian no-fly zone for the same reason, to help civilians get out. But if we just allow this third-rate country that happens to have nuclear weapons to continue to call the shots, then there are going to be global implications for this.
And there are global implications right now as people are beginning to go hungry. Food prices are spiking, and it's only going to get worse. General Ben Hodges, thank you so much, sir.
All right, Dana, thanks for the privilege.
And that's our backstory this week on Ukraine and world hunger. The blockade is illegal by any measure. The threat of Russia to use nuclear weapons is deterring NATO from clearing the Black Sea so far. But a coalition of the willing is likely. And with UN support, Russia would be foolish to try and challenge a corridor for safe passage of merchant vessels. Then again, Putin is showing contempt for the West and for much of the world. And a dramatic high-stakes play may soon unfold in the Black Sea. I'm Dana Lewis. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please share Backstory, and I'll talk to you again soon.